Velkommen alle sammen. I'm here today to speak about Valhalla, or Valhåll as the real name was. And there are basically, three possibilities as to what it really is. Okay, there's maybe a million theories online that you might read in Facebook groups from Valhalla bros or whatever, but in the academic community at least, there are three theories, and I think these are the only three theories that are really possible if we are going from what the actual historical sources say. And I'm very open to all of these. I have no preference because they all have very valid arguments and they're all based on the sources, and I'm sure all of you, no matter what your theory is, you will agree with at least one of these. So first one is that Valhalla was actually not a part of the original Norse or Germanic afterlife belief, and the reason that the scholars think this is the mentions of Valhalla from the historical texts, they do not pop up until later on in time, and of course most of these sources are written by Christians whose perceptions and reliability about paganism and pagan afterlife can definitely not be trusted. So here's a little list for you. This is every source that contains Valhalla in it from the medieval times and older. And these later ones here are written a couple hundred years after pagan times by Christians, and they're not reliable really. But then we have the ones here that are left. These are definitely composed in pagan times and definitely reflect a pagan belief in an afterlife called Valhalla or Valhåll. So why do some scholars say that Valhåll wasn't an original part of Germanic pagan afterlife belief? It's because the very earliest mention of Valhåll here comes in the poem Atop, and this is the poem that can be dated to earlier than almost every other Eddic poem, but in here Valhalla is not an afterlife, but it's actually a real live feasting hall of a real king named Gunnar. So that's why scholars believe that Valhalla is an afterlife, could be a later creation and not what we originally believed in. Also, we find no evidence of belief in Valhalla in any of the other Germanic peoples long before the Viking Age either. Not the Anglo-Saxons, Goths, Lombards, Franks, whatever. And none of the Germanic tribes, we have no evidence that they believed in Valhalla or something like that. So Valhalla as an afterlife first started popping up in the poems that we can date to the early 900s, roughly. But before that, the only mentions of an afterlife that we find in any texts are hell, of course, and of course reincarnation. We know this was the belief of the Germanic and really all European peoples as far back as we have records. So Valhalla, we can say pretty sure is a later invention. The question is, was Valhalla kind of a Christianized concept that was brought into the Norse world in the late Viking Age? Not a creation of Christianity, but influenced by Christianity and their version of heaven is a possibility. But the other possibility is, was Valhalla some sort of spiritual discovery that maybe Völva or some spiritual leaders came upon while in meditation or in their shamanic journeys to the realm of the dead or something like that? Is this like an afterlife that we call Valhalla, that has the afterlife always existed, but we just didn't know about it until the mid-Viking Age? Or maybe it existed before, but we just called it something different, something we don't know, and then we eventually called it Valhalla like we know today. So I don't know what to think, that's all debatable, but those are just some options on that theory. The second theory about Valhalla is that it is actually an afterlife where some go to after they die. Most theologists have this theory, and especially the people that are really into comparative religious studies from around the world. So yes, it does seem definitely like Valhalla is a real afterlife from the sources, even the sources composed in pagan times. Anyone who wants to ignore that is wrong. So Valhalla definitely does seem like a real afterlife that was believed in, but please get one thing straight. Please do not make the mistake of relating Valhalla to the Christian heaven. I shouldn't even have to say this, but I see people making the mistake every single day. A lot of Christians coming into Norse paganism, just starting out, try to do this, and we just need to get that idea out of our heads, that after we die, Valhalla is this paradise-like place, and the alternative is the cold, gloomy hell. No, hell was not a bad place. in the Norse beliefs. We all went there while we were waiting to be reincarnated, and a select few went to Valhalla from the sources. So please get that out of your head. Don't even compare it to anything foreign at all. Definitely not the Christian heaven, but if you have to compare Valhalla to something foreign, you should be picking like the Hindu or Buddhist nirvana. That's the closest thing, really, where you get reincarnated after many, many lives, and then eventually one lifetime you reach your full spiritual awakening, and that's where you go to their idea of the heaven that they call nirvana. Don't forget, Hinduism and Norse paganism are related, and we all came from the same place about 8,000 years ago. So if you're going to relate Valhalla to any type of afterlife, do it with the Hindu nirvana, not the Christian heaven. So this theory is probably the most popular, and people will find themselves believing in something like this. But there's one problem. There is one mention of someone going to Valhalla and then being reincarnated, and that is in Helgakvida, number 2. And that brings us to our third theory, that Valhalla is reincarnation. Now, this theory is not as popular as the other two among the scholars that I just went over, but there are some definite good arguments for this theory. Basically, that when you die, you can skip through hell as quickly as possible and go straight to Valhalla. They relate Valhalla to the mother's womb, or the burial mound, or the new body that you will enter, and that is what Valhalla represents. Also, don't forget that Hel and Valhalla come from the same Indo-European root word, kel. So in very old times, Hel and Valhalla were probably no different at all. It makes sense. The only thing that I don't like about this theory is that it requires a hell of a lot of symbolism and hidden meanings, and that's very hard to prove. The problem is we have some very detailed descriptions of Valhalla from the literature in pagan times. Grimnismal is the most detailed poem there, but we also have some very clear descriptions of who can go to Valhalla. So the descriptions of Valhalla are very detailed and comprehensive, and it seems very hard to relate to just body parts inside the mother's womb. I've seen some really good arguments for this, explaining a lot of it, but we can't just take one theory and match it up with one poem. It has to agree with all of these here. And I just have not read any works that have done a complete job of that. But I still like this option, and I'm open to it. Just needs a little bit more research and explanations. Which of these three theories do I believe in? I don't know. The answer is not really in our texts that we still have, unfortunately. These texts are lost. I'm sure we had texts telling us, the actual belief of Valhalla from ancient times, but those were destroyed by you-know-who. We had an answer, probably. Most of you know this, but the Poetic Edda, Codex Regius, the only thing that basically reflects unfiltered pagan belief, it was hidden away for more than 400 years after it was written, because the author of it, whoever that was, knew it would be destroyed. They found it on a farm in Iceland in the 1600s, and they were going to send it off to Denmark to the king as a gift. And by the time it got there, 9 pages of it were torn out. So we really don't have the answer to what Valhalla is in our texts. We could look into other religions around the world for some parallels, other related close ones. The problem is all the close European ones are tainted too, and they had their texts destroyed also, and they have even less sources than we do. The Celts, the Romans, the Sami, the Slavs, the Greeks, all of them had a lot of their texts destroyed too, so we have more than they do actually. So I would suggest looking to Hinduism. It's our closest still surviving relative to our religion. It's not the same, it's quite different, but we can definitely get some really good ideas from there. And if we go back, like I said, 8,000 years, we all had the same religion, we just evolved into 2 separate places. But to sum up this video, don't focus on this too much. If you want to know what our afterlife belief is, it's reincarnation. Reincarnation. Everything. All of our myths, understanding of nature, our own lives, the universe, everything is cyclical, and it revolves around rebirth. We die, We go to hell, we go to the spirit world, the realm of the dead, whatever you want to call it, for some time until we wait to be reincarnated. That should be our main focus. We have too many people just focusing on Valhalla and coming up with all these crazy theories. The main focus should be on reincarnation. We just don't have enough information to show that Valhalla was a real afterlife that was believed in and exactly what it was and who went there. But we do have enough evidence, historical and actually modern scientific, to know that reincarnation is very real, and I'll link some works below that go over the scientific studies of those. So definitely do some research and come up with your own beliefs. Let me know if you guys have any thoughts on Valhalla too, any things that, you know, kind of connect the dots. Maybe if we can get all of our minds on it, we might actually be able to figure out what it is. But don't forget about reincarnation. And there's no need to fear hell. Everyone goes there and is reborn. It's not an unpleasant place, and even when we're there, it's not like we're distant and alone. We're still very connected to the world of the living, even from hell. But that's a subject for another video, and that's all I'll say for today. Vi ses nästa gång.